Hello everyone, this is Mrs. Langmeyer, and I'm going to do a quick review of Chapter 1 and then get you started into Chapter 2, which is going to be your first week of September. So in first chapter that you were to read, it was kind of an introduction of some history of why we started to research children and how they began to see the benefit of what was happening in early childhood did have an impact on their future. So they talked about a few key psychoanalysts, and if any of you took psychology in your high school or took family and consumer science child development class, this will be a little bit of a review for you. For those of you that did not have that class, we will be talking about quite a few child psychology folks in this chapter and then later on. And you'll have to make sure you are aware of one versus the other, and you'll be referencing those in some projects in the future. But the key one that you've probably heard of, kind of a controversial guy, was Sigmund Freud. And in Chapter 1 they talked about Sigmund Freud and how he looked back as he was studying adults that had a lot of emotional problems, that he found the connection if he went back into their childhood and understood their childhood, that made sense why they might have had troubles as an adult. So from then we learned about the key things we needed to do for a child in their early years so that they would not have any problems, emotional problems, as they became an adults. He also talked about psychosexual theory, where he saw that there was a connection about how parents would manage their child's sexual growth and their aggression and their drives, and how oftentimes children about the age of 3 would seek out the opposite sex parent as their key connection. And you might see that in a 3-year-old, that maybe they have a very strong mommy connection if it's a little boy, and the daddy's girl kind of thing comes on about age 3 because the father is such a key part. Also in that section on the psychosexual, he talks about the id and the ego and the superego and how they developed those. The id is the largest portion of your mind, so that is a very big section that comes on right, early on after birth. The ego then is as a child is entering the toddlerhood and they're starting to develop their personality, and I think you can see that in some children. If you look at them over a period of time, the parents might say, you were always a shy child, and they are still shy. Or the child who was just always the energetic, bubbly, silly toddler might be that classroom clown that you have later on. So the personality that happens, and that's the ego. And then the superego, which usually starts to develop at between ages 3 to 6. So when they go to preschool, kindergarten, up to kindergarten, and that's when their conscience starts to be developed. And that's where a parent has to intervene to make sure that the child knows what is appropriate and inappropriate. That's why oftentimes at preschool they learn the rules and the limits, so that they learn how to conform within society and that there are rules for them. So the superego develops oftentimes mostly during that preschool era. Also, Freud talked about the oral and the anal connection. When children are first born, everything is in their mouth. Their bottle, the breast, the toy, that's how they learn, is through their mouth. Everything is in their mouth. That's why you need a child-proof. And then after they are kind of coming to that end of that phase, or they should work themselves out of that phase, then it is the anal phase, where they're more interested in their body parts, their sexual parts, touching, curiosity, and that's when potty training can begin, when they have a connection with that. If you aren't seeing that connection, then they're probably not ready for potty training. But when he talked about, with Freud, he said there has to be a connection, and the parents have to be able to strike a balance between the ability to give into gratification, so making the child happy, and saying no. Okay, so that they learn limits. And oftentimes we see some parents where they just give in to everything. Well, then we're going to have problems in adulthood, because they're not going to realize there are limits, there are You're not going to get a prize for everything because that's not the way the world works. Okay, we also learned about Erickson, and I will probably be including some pictures or bringing into class on September 11th when we meet some visuals so that you can see a little bit more about them. But Erickson was also key in your chapter, psychosocial, and he talked about there were 5 stages that a child goes through, and then he also went into the stages into adulthood as well. So you'll want to make sure you review that, where his the steps are trust versus mistrust, and the importance of a parent responding to a crying child. Otherwise, mistrust is going to happen. They're going to think nobody is there to love them, and that's going to cause big problems in the future. Autonomy versus shame or doubt, allowing them to try things on their own, to become successful, not always saying no, 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 or that's bad, you did that wrong. They need to explore, and that's why we need to give them an opportunity in a safe environment to do exploration. The third one is initiative versus guilt. That's where you often see that make-believe section about 3s, 4s, and they have to kind of show some initiative to try to play house or play mommy, daddy, doctor, whatever it might be, and not have guilt about maybe not succeeding or being embarrassed and people laughing at them. The 4th stage is at the school age, so most of you will see that is the industry versus inferiority. Children that don't feel like they are successful, that they don't get compliments, that they don't get comments that are productive, will say, I give up. That's the inferiority. And they may already enter the early elementary years thinking that they are stupid, they're dumb, they can't do math, they're dumb at reading, and we need to get through that and find some successes or to intervene with some intervention. Step 5 is the identity versus role confusion. What are we supposed to do? What does a girl do? What does a boy do? What does a police officer do? What is a teacher's role? What are we supposed to do, in certain areas and out in society? Step 6 is intimacy versus isolation. That is adolescence. 7, generativity versus stagnation, being able to be successful so you don't feel the stagnant, always something you want to be always learning, trying new things so life doesn't become stagnant. And then the final stage in our older age is integrity versus despair. Do we live our life going, you know what, I did all I wanted to do, I give myself an A, or do we say, geez, I screwed that all up and I wish I would have? Okay. Also, we talk about then into chapter 2, is going to be the studying of children and how we study children and the research and how we research children. Children we have to be very sensitive with because they're somebody else's child, and we can't just perform any kind of test that we want. Because we have to be very careful. We don't want to cause damage in early childhood. That's going to show throughout their adult life. So we have to involve some ethics. And in that ethics, we have to make sure that we never harm a child in our research. We also have to get informed consent forms from parents. We have to get consent from the child when a child understands what we're doing. Are you okay with this? Can we watch you? Do you mind, we're going to take this test and then we're going to compare it to other children. We also, all the tests need to be private. What we find out, we don't tell other people, like, oh my goodness, this child just really failed. They're terrible, or things about their difficulties. Children and parents also have the right to find out the results of what you did with your studies. And they have the right, when you find something that needs to be fixed or corrected or can be intervened, that they have that right that you will help them out if you find that there's some issues. Okay? Most of our tests that you see in child development are going to be psychological. Unfortunately, psychological tests are hard to prove because you might find that you test a child on a day when it was a bad day. They didn't get enough sleep. They didn't have breakfast. Maybe their parents were fighting. So you might get some miscued results just because children have different emotions. It's a bad day. You all have that too. It's not like a doctor where we can always just draw blood and find out there's something wrong. So that makes it a lot more difficult, and we will have to do different studies, which your chapter talks about. One of the types of studies that they talk about in your book is the naturalistic observations, where someone goes into a child's environment and just watches them in their normal environment. That might be somebody who's from Early Start, from Help Me Grow, a preschool teacher who comes and does a home visit. We're on their turf. Okay, they usually act more themselves in their comfortable turf. We might have structural observations. This might be where you go to the classrooms and you've been observing. That's not the norm. That's not maybe every child's comfort area, but in that opportunity, every child has the same, opportunity to have a desk. Every child has a crayon. Every child has the same teacher. Every child has the same recess. So there are some things we can control in a structured observation. When I was at Ohio State in my early childhood courses, we had a learning lab where it was a preschool, and all the children had access to all of the materials and toys, but we had a wall, and that wall to the children, it looked like a mirror, so they would just see themselves. But for us on the other side of that mirror, it was a window. We saw what the children were doing, and we would sit and record, and the children didn't know people were staring at them and watching them, that strangers were watching them. So that would be a structured observation where we go we set the stage in a preschool or in a classroom. Okay. While we're doing that, we might also have event sampling. We might set up a situation. Maybe we're having an event, we're having a birthday party, we're doing some testing, we throw out certain arts and crafts, and then we observe with that sampling. We might do time samplings where it's at different times, same children, different times of the day, different ages, once when they're 1, once when they're 2, and then and we might get a more common situation than just one flat day we come in, because you all know we might have had one bad day. The thing that we have to watch out, though, when we are doing observations is that we might come in with a bias. We might have our childhood knowledge or our family life may influence how we're thinking other children should react. So sometimes that is a problem. We also might be able to test children through structural interviews. Those would be tests and questionnaires that we ask children. And then we might be able to do some other testing that goes into the medical or hospital. Those are called neurobiological research tests. And the methods you might use are EEGs, PET scans, MRIs, and NIRS. We might do some neuron and nervous system testing, where we might put a barking dog in front of them and then measure their heart rate. Did that scare them? Take their blood pressure, and we could see what upsets them, what situations might cause their heart rate to rise, their blood pressure to go up, to know that they're under stress. We could also take saliva tests. Sometimes they will do that if they suspect a child might have been abused. They will take those kinds of tests, because that will tell us what the cortisol levels are if there was stress. The higher the cortisol, the higher the stress. Other things in chapter 2 that we talked about is the impact of pregnancy, and how some of the impact of pregnancy and the pregnant mother might impact the child and the development of the child. And we'll talk at extent when we meet on the 11th. But one of the research things that they did in your chapter was a mother who was diabetic, and talked about the mother's high glucose, high sugar levels that impact the infants to their pancreas to be able to create more insulin, and then the oxygen levels are increased. But in order for the oxygen to be able to be moved out to the brain, we need more iron, and oftentimes pregnant women, that's one of the nutrients they get the least amount of, and they're most deficient on is iron. So a mother who is a diabetic doesn't have enough iron, that baby's oxygen isn't going to flow to the brain, and there might be some problems with a baby's memory, and that goes on through their lifetime. So just some of the medical types of things we know prenatally what must be done so that a child does not have that problem. So lots of neat things are happening in this chapter. Lots of research, and you'll understand how many different ways there are to gather research, the problems with gathering research. You might think about some of the things that maybe you didn't realize when you were in school, some of the research your teachers did. And you will probably form some of those when you are a teacher. After years of experience, you'll realize this may give the outcome of this on that child. And so I will see you on the 11th. I'm excited to see you. Make sure you start your first assignment because it will be due either in person. You can bring it to class when we meet, or you can put it in the Dropbox. I might also be sending you a video of my grandchildren because I've been granted that permission to share them, and just have you observe and see what an observer would do, and then have you comment back what were some of the observations you noticed, and why even grandma turning on the camera, why they might behave different, and how difficult it is to get some research. So nice to see you, and enjoy week 2. Take care now.